tomorrow.
what can I say? I have seen your beautiful paintings photographed, and I read your introduction, which is beautiful. I think is wonderful. And I think it will be really, for me, very interesting to speak with you about your painting in outside, because I think most artists who paint outside in the history, painted outside, actually painted at home. So I personally gave up on painting in nature when I was, I think, about 17 or 18. I simply could not endure the mosquitoes. So this made me change my idea. So, and before we go on, we have to recognize that the invention of the tube for painting has been a great promoter of people who painted in nature. Because before that, it was very, very difficult. I mean, in oil, impossible. People used to do watercolors in nature because watercolors had these little blocks of paint that with a wet brush you could get some color and then create a little sketch, and from that you would go on painting. I think that Cezanne did quite a lot of watercolors outside, but I don't think that he painted much of his landscapes outdoors. And it was an American who I don't remember his name. I think you have corrected me.
You just didn't have his name in that essay. I'll look it up while you guys are talking, and I can tell you.
Yeah, it was an American who invented it, who registered the invention in 1849 or so, the tube. Before that, they tried all kinds of other things. There were some packages that contained it in swine how do you call it?
Bladder.
So whatever. But
Okay.
it didn't work. It didn't work well.
So Sam, according to your essay, the disposable tubes of paint dates from 1841 and patented by American artist John Goff Rand.
Yeah,
and then we talk about the screw top for the tubes, which was patented in 1902 from an Englishman whose name.
The screw was invented by Mr. I think Winson, of Winson and Newton. And this was in 1901 or something like this. So you see, it's a new thing, painting with paint that you can take along with you. So now, please tell us, how do you paint? Do you really paint all your paintings outdoors, or you paint them sometimes?
They're all both. They all have their genesis outdoors. And many times I've always believed that my subject matter picks me, not the other way around.
Yeah.
And many things that I've ended up painting have been things I've passed by or known or seen sometimes my whole life. And then at a certain moment, it just seems like it's time, or the light is right, or the time of year is right, or the feeling is right. And that'll begin with a thumbnail sketch of just the most basic changes in value, with a heavy magic marker, just like a 2x3 in sketch. Then I will go back with a pochade easel, the painting easel for outside, and usually work in an 8x10 or 9x12. So those are sizes I prefer. The 9x12 is the one that actually fits best in the pochade easel box that I use.
Yeah.
And then that exercise will be a half hour or an hour. And this is where I would say much of my approach to this is I've learned in the operating room, not in the field or painting. After I've been painting plein air for a number of years, I realized, boy, I have this very strong deja vu familiar feeling. And then I realized that the size of my panels is about the size of the operative field when I was operating. Because I didn't start plein air painting really until I was well underway in my surgical career. And then the other similarities became apparent. You never, ever take your eye off your subject once you're engaged, just as you wouldn't in an operation. You're using instruments. You only need a few instruments. You never blame your instruments, and you certainly don't blame the weather. I would say plein air painting is a fool's errand. You're fighting everything. I think the hardest thing is, the lights changing, and I've actually noticed how climate change is affecting wind patterns. There is definitely more wind on a daily basis, at least around here, than there was 5 or 10 years ago. So you're fighting that, not to mention the bugs that were plaguing you, Sam. We have hornets. One time I was out last summer and I heard something crackling behind me, and it was a bear.
Wow.
So I hightailed it. And other times I've heard gunshots all over the place because this is a very active hunting area up here in Northwest Pennsylvania. So then that painting's done. Then I'll bring it back and then expand it using a grid form, and do a more complete work. And at that point, it may be weeks or even months before it's completed. And sometimes I will actually take the larger work back to the place if the atmospheric conditions are similar, if there's some other detail I want to focus on. So virtually every one of them, just about all of them, have been started outside, finished inside, and some went back outside again.
Yeah, but I must say what I find so excellent in your work is the detail. I mean, is the detail. Although it looks as if it was painted with a certain freedom, with a certain easy brushwork, the brushwork is very precise. I find that every brush stroke is kind of extremely responsible for what it brings out. If it is a branch, if it is a leaf, if it is just a stain of sun on a tree or something, it is extremely precise. And I think that this is the power of the work, is I would say is the high resolution of your painting. I find that the high resolution is something that gives it the force. And it would be very interesting for me to hear from you, because we know all that art somehow grows from art. Who are the painters of landscapes of the past or the present that have inspired you, or with whom you have these kind of visual conversations that we as painters all have with painters of the past, when we look at the reproductions of their work or real work, when we go to museums and so on, we can have conversations. We can take from them, they can give us something, and we cannot that much give them back, but it's still a conversation. So I would like to hear from you, who are the ones that are important in your eyes for yourself?
Boy, I can think of about five, but the two that I never get tired of, always drawn to, are Monet, which would surprise some
Yeah.
people, because you don't think of precise or really tight drawing. Although if you look at his earlier work,
Oh my
there was
goodness. It's
nothing shabby about his
very,
draftsmanship. It was superb. So
absolutely.
I would start with Monet, not to mention, I always loved his life. I mean, he had it all. I mean, he lived a long life. Uh, he did gorgeous artwork. He could do a painting and he could provide a year's income from it. He had every major person in Europe wanting to visit him. He had the equivalent of a five-star Michelin kitchen in his own house,
Yeah.
and he got away with smoking.
And he was very conscious of how to promote himself.
Yes, and he
Very,
served
very
his
conscious.
country.
He knew that the only way to promote himself is to be good friends with two types of people. First of all, journalists, and then important people in the field of politics. So he was a very good friend of the president of France, of Clemenceau, and he saw to it that every day somebody would mention him in the newspapers, that he ate at this restaurant, or that he was seen in that clothiers shop ordering a new suit, or they saw him walking on Champs-Élysées or whatever. He was very smart. He was a very, very, very smart man, a great artist. I mean, there's no doubt. But what about going further back? I mean, are there any
Yes,
other? Yeah.
I would say Constable,
Yes.
um,
Right.
partly because the atmospheric conditions he captured
Clouds.
is
The clouds.
it's identical to the way it is here. It's bright with showers, as the British would
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. Right.
You look in one corner and you see a dazzling sun, and then you turn around and you see this pewter colored heavy sky punctuated with a beautiful
Yeah.
patches of cobalt blue. And to me, that says Constable. There was the other important landscape for me is it's as much a spiritual connection as a stylistic one, and that's a painter many people, at least in this country, have not heard about. He's a patron saint of landscape painting or art in general in Canada, and that's Tom Thompson. He uh, he has some interesting parallels to Van Gogh in that he died violently. He had a short life, and he was extremely prolific over just a few years. And his training wasn't exactly, it wasn't a complete or a very prolonged training in art, although he was trained in graphic design. And he did hundreds of about 8 by 10 size panels. And he was a real plein air painter. He did do some important studio paintings, but most of his work was done out in the forests of Algonquin Park in Canada, where I've painted as well. And I can tell you, if you think the bugs
Yeah.
are bad there, they're really bad there. And he worked as a park ranger during his time as a painting. But his work sort of exemplifies, and I'm glad you noticed this about my work, what I see as a cardinal principle that I've brought to my work from surgery, which is you make every move count and as few moves as possible in your painting.
Yeah. I was wondering, painters like remaining in France, um, of like Vuillard or Bonnard, do they have any s- specific bearing for you?
Yeah, I love Vuillard's subtlety. My mother was a very accomplished painter. In fact,
Yeah,
she was the one that got me into introduced me to the world of painting. And if you saw some of her paintings, you would think she was Vuillard. They're
yeah.
strikingly similar. They're very soft, subtle, gentle, a real a really good use of gray. Her interiors, I've occasionally, and you might see it in this collection, there are a couple of floral paintings I did, which I love doing,
Yeah.
which are a gentler, more reflective side than some of the outside pieces, which are uh, a little more exuberant, and in some cases a little more conflicted.
I have seen in your painting there are a few huts, some old. There's a beautiful painting that I have seen of some of a kind of a abandoned, destroyed factory, and so on.
Oh,
I mean, these things of man-made objects. Does it mean that you are going to get also inside of those huts or buildings? What I want to say is, a painter who is so much associated with still lifes, Morandi. He was a fantastic landscape painter. His landscapes are not very known. In Italy, they are, yes. And there is, as for him, you have a feeling, no difference between still life and the landscape, because the landscape becomes a still life and the still life becomes a landscape. And it is mainly the magic of the brush that leaves some paint on the canvas, and the brushstroke then is a metamorphosis into our perception of light or shade or shape or whatever. So I was just wondering, do you have any feeling for painting indoors, the landscapes of indoors?
I think I'm headed in that direction. The factory painting was done not about a year ago, but
Yeah,
as this demolition was I was very drawn to it, particularly at the end of the day. And as time went on, I realized, yes, there's beauty in the demolition and the decline of this building. So much happened there. It was part of our local history, and there was an element of beauty in it. It fit into at least my understanding of the aesthetic of wabi sabi. It spoke to me of impermanence, imperfection, uh, and at one point, finally, I said, "All right, I think I've got it." And I had done urban landscapes, about 5 or 6 years ago, quite a few of them around here. But this one caught the sun in a way, it reminded me of an actual landscape. This could have just as easily been a grove of trees, and to me, it was just as much spiritually alive. And I'm sure it'll happen again.
yeah. I mean, I'm interested to know what you think of one of my favorite landscape painters, who is Mondrian.
I love one thing
His
you
early
don't see in art
landscapes are
books is
excellent.
you don't see his paintings before he became really abstract.
Yeah,
I was just looking at one he did in 1901. First of all, it was
yeah,
a still life uh, with a blue plate, and I believe it was stunning. It was stunning in the simplicity, in the presence of
yeah.
the objects, the absolute perfection of the texture and the color. And that goes for every landscape painting of his that I've seen. He's someone I really want to study more of.
Yeah, he was extraordinary. There is also a Russian painter, a Jewish Russian painter called Levitan.
Yeah.
Levitan was a most extraordinary landscape painter. Extraordinary. He was I think he was sick with tuberculosis, and he was being taken care of by Chekhov. And he lived with Chekhov for some time. Chekhov had a very high opinion of him. And Levitan left a good number of works. Well, in Russia, he's very known, but not very known outside of Russia, because simply his works never traveled very much outside of Russia. But he was an extraordinary in that kind of quintessential simplification of the shapes. And when you see a painting of Levitan, for me, it is just perfection, because everything fits into the frame, and yet it is so much more. You can look to the right and to the left, and you imagine what goes on, and yet what is inside is the entire world by itself. So I was just wondering if you knew his work.
I do. I think I think you mentioned him in a conversation we had a couple years ago.
Yeah.
And I loved his work. And there's some other Russian impressionists that no one would have ever heard of here that are
Oh,
equally
they had
captivating.
wonderful painters. They
Oh,
had
I've
wonderful
run
impressionists.
across 4 or 5 of them.
Yes. Well, also Chagall was an extraordinary landscape painter. And I think that landscape was maybe in the 19th century the most important subject of painting. Once photography liberated the artists from the need to practice portraits or historical paintings and so on, the landscape became a wonderful thing, because it is also offering people an additional window with a much better view than the real window into the street. So they could hang windows on, and then landscapes also allowed people, with the help of Cézanne, to go much more courageously into abstraction, which actually every painting that exists since time immemorial has in it. Every great painting is also a great abstraction. If you if you go to the Renaissance painters or the painters of the classical period, whenever they achieved greatness, their abstraction is perfect. So this brings us to kind of an all over encompassing idea that we bring the world to people's homes with a landscape. So this is what your art is doing.
It connects us to the land, which is its other function. I mean, for me, the joy of painting is no greater than the appreciation of being out there. I always see something that I've never seen before, whether it's an animal or tree or a plant. But it's like life itself. You don't have a lot of time to waste. You really only have about an hour.
Yeah.
It reminds me a lot of trauma surgery. We have a concept called the golden hour. In other words, when you're injured, the human body has a reserve of about 1 hour physiologically to
Yeah.
make it until resuscitation can begin. And so I now believe that you have 1 hour to rescue a painting when you've started a subject. You got about an hour, and if you haven't got the basic structure, the basic idea, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So that keeps me on my toes.
This reminds me, I think it was Delacroix who spoke of the speed of painting. And he said that an artist should be able to paint a portrait of someone whom he sees on a roof, able to make the portrait of that person before he reaches ground. So this is the speed an artist is supposed to perform.
We have a
Yes.
saying, and when you're really accomplished as a surgeon, and I think as an artist, you make haste slowly. You give the
Yeah.
appearance that, there was no effort. There's an Italian term, and I can't remember the name of it, about something looking effortless, although it's totally deliberate and intention. Every bit of it's intentional, but it looks like it was a spontaneous event.
Now I have a question. When you worked as a surgeon, everything was about life, death, and everything was incredibly, incredibly important. Now, when you paint, I project it from myself. I know, okay, so it will be all right. It's all right. If I will mess it up, I'll mess it up. No one will die because of that. So
You-
I enjoy a sense of incredible freedom. Incredible freedom. I think this is when I really feel that I am very free, when I am with a brush and with paint in front of a canvas, and so on. And I know that the world does not depend on what is going to happen. So how do you personally balance between those two very different periods of existence of your own? Well, before that, you were engaged in something extremely important, and now it's something important to you, important to people to admire you, but it is not, the life doesn't depend on it.
You might be surprised to hear this. The feeling I had when I was operating, even if someone was hemorrhaging rapidly or, with dreadfully, and the feeling I have when I'm actually painting, it's the same feeling.
Really.
Now, maybe the appeal of painting for me is not being in a situation where the only harm that would come of it would be my bruised ego and not injury to a human being. But the experience itself, Thomas and I used to talk about this a lot, that art is not skill, it's not the medium, and it does not begin with thinking. But what it requires in terms of the technique, the craft, is a certain amount of focus, concentration, discipline, that if I was operating and a circulating nurse dropped a tray of instruments behind me, or one time the light went up, I wouldn't even hear it. I wouldn't even notice it. The same thing would happen if I'm painting and I'm intent. My dog could be coming in barking and chewing on something he shouldn't be. I wouldn't notice it. It's all about the focus. I notice that when I'm done, I put the brushes down at the end of a case. Suddenly, I am exhausted. I had a terrible back problem that was really hard to live with. And I never noticed it when I was operating, but as
Yeah.
soon as I was done, it would come back. So there's some direct overlap, but the important difference is one was a relief from the other. Definitely the most difficult times I had in surgery later spawned, some of the best times of reflection and release in painting. And that's something I'm actually beginning to share with surgeons. I'm suggesting for people in training and in practice that they spend a couple of hours a week drawing, if not painting, because there is so much overlap between the two arts of surgery and painting that I think believe it or not, I think with more practice and observation, visual memory, and technical work with drawing, it would actually improve their work as surgeons and vice versa. Their time will help your observation that is so important in drawing and painting. So it's
Then
a
there are
whole
two other things that are interesting in the passage of your work as a surgeon and your work as a painter. As a surgeon, you had always to work with a group of people who were assisting you, who were helping you, I mean, it was a collaboration. I mean, one of them not doing their job rightly, and everything would be somehow disturbed by it. Now, when you paint, everything depends only on yourself. You are alone, and you have the solitude on one hand, the loneliness, and on the other hand, the freedom of not depending on others. So how do you see these two very different modes of operation?
I think because as a painter, I don't think I'm by myself.
Hmm.
I agree with this. Another thing that Thomas I used to talk about, we'd say the work isn't complete until somebody sees it and
Yeah, sure.
appreciates it. And I feel that way about colleagues, and I emphasize collegiality as part of this initiative I was talking about with surgeons. I said, the best part of this for many of you, it's not going to be what you produce. And I don't even feel that strongly about what I produce many times. It's the experience, it's the collegiality, it's the connection you make. Because
Yeah.
real creativity is making connections, whether you're talking about the biology of the nerve cell, social structures, your relationship with whatever you believe in the form of a deity, in your relationship with yourself, not to mention your relationship with your subject as an artist. That's what creativity is. It's making that connection.
Yes, I'm also thinking what is interesting is the subject of size. Size, because the size of the painting that you can do in the open is very limited.
It sure is.
And sometimes, for instance, we were speaking of Levitan. Many of the paintings of Levitan are very small. When you see them on a book as reproductions, when I look at them projected sometimes on my large screen on
Yeah,
television,
they're all
there is on YouTube a series of about 150 paintings of Levitan that come one after another on a large screen, and they look fantastic. And in reality, these are very small paintings. So the question is this: an image actually does not have a physical size, because when you remember the times that with a camera, we did very tiny photographs and we projected them then on a screen in order to be able to see them. I remember the beginning of color and so on. Realize that the physical size of the image it doesn't exist actually. The image in itself can have all kinds of sizes. Now, are you drawn to larger sizes, or do you, on the contrary, prefer the thing to remain in a small size? What is your relationship to the size of the art?
Overall, I don't think, to me, I don't have a preset idea about size. I think big subject, big canvas. If it's something really important to me, and I feel I have the energy for it, larger size. The largest I've gone outside has been about 24 by 30, where I really had to move to get down even but it was fun and it's extremely liberating because you really don't have time to fool around and distract yourself with details. On the other hand, there's some subjects where, gee, I don't know if I make this too small, it's going to have too tiny a voice. It needs a little more. But generally, I've kind of as where my comfort zone seems to have been, the size has been 16 by 20.
Yeah.
And I think just because it accommodates things, and then some of it's just practical in terms of space and time.
Thing that I was wondering about asking you in terms of exactly size, because I wanted to speak about my own experience of visiting museums in the time of the COVID
Mhm.
um, years. I was spending my time with the computer. There are wonderful um, uh, programs that allow us to visit museums and visit their collections and see some paintings the way it is absolutely impossible to see when you are in front of the real work. For instance, I remember going to Madrid on my computer and looking at Hieronymus Bosch, where the images were in high resolution, sometimes 10 times larger than they really are. And I could see the brushstrokes of
Mhm.
Bosch. Now, this tells us how art can be offered, how art can be seen. Now, I was wondering, what is your own experience in terms of seeing art once it becomes projected by the screen of the computer, once it gets a light that comes from inside and not anymore the light reflected on the painting from the outside that kind of bumps back to you, but really light. A sky in your painting on my computer has a light from inside. There is something, there is something, there is some kind of a different life that suddenly works of art can have in our very modern time, in our very modern way of being able to look at things. I was just wondering, what is your feeling about these transformations?
Well, openness, because I've noticed it too. There's some pieces of mine that I didn't think much of at all, but boy, projected differently, enlarged, printed. I couldn't. My wife is who's my most reliable and probably my most trustworthy critic said, geez, you need to screw up more often because your your failures and your rejects, when you print them or enlarge them are some of the best. She said, that's what it should have been in the first place. So I agree, and I'm pretty unschooled. I'm not very sophisticated when it comes to the use of tech. I have a son who's constantly after me to get more
Yeah.
familiar. I don't know about using computer generated art. That's a very different kind of experience than what I've written about in the introduction of this show, and
Yeah,
certainly
yeah,
what we've talked about. It that question about how is spiritual experience itself going to evolve with computer technology. I mean, I'm been wrestling and meditating on this idea that life is not a story. Life is something of it's on its own, and the importance of narrative in a story is it's the only way we can figure out to coexist with things that are already kind of pretty much preordained in nature and in physics. So I um I have the feeling that I'm interested in this, but I'm not sure how far along it would take me personally. And I certainly agree there the things I would have never appreciated or had the chance to appreciate in an art gallery that I can do on a screen, because now it's so crowded in a lot of the larger galleries. I just don't have the privacy and lack of distraction that allows me to really focus.
Yes, maybe I should have mentioned when we spoke of size, the size of paintings was very much imposed on artists for all kinds of other reasons. I mean,
Mhm.
people were ordering something for a given size and so on. In times, for instance, when personal exhibitions didn't exist, artists exhibited in the salon.
Mhm.
And when they were important, the salon was keeping for them a big place. Where they were less important, they were told all you have is 30 centimeters on 40 centimeters. It will be on the third row of the paintings. That I mean, this determined a lot of sizes. And what we have today, of course, is, I think, the new generation of great landscapes painters or landscape artists, for me personally, are the extraordinary photographers that work for films. The movies have sometimes photography which is so extraordinarily artistic, and the possibilities of today's technology are absolutely extraordinary. For instance, I was watching on television, there is one of the recent series is called Ripley. It's in black and white, and the photography is very much inspired, invented by the Kiriko. It's surrealistic, it's black and white, the figures are tiny, the landscapes are enormous, and it is a kind of a landscape painting where actually, if you just watch it, you turn off the sound, it doesn't matter what happens, it matters how it looks. And maybe this is what in art is so extraordinary, is the language that comes through without sound. Now I feel that we have done a lot of sound here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the same things happen in music where size does matter.
Oh
When
yeah,
you see the evolution from the chamber music to the ever expanding orchestra,
yeah.
we
To
had
the
a
Eighth Symphony of
technological,
Mahler, the
at the
Symphony of
same
the
time, the
Thousand.
paint tube was liberating painters to paint outdoors. We had developments in France that allowed the blossoming of concert organ, the organ music repertoire, both
Yeah,
liturgical and symphonic.
yeah,
It was because of the arms race that was going on with the organ producers in France. So you had a very highly technical business creating the conditions for fabulous, wonderful new art that wouldn't have been possible before.
yeah.
So it goes back to your question about the interface of technology and art. There's certainly a precedent where technical innovation can bring about a whole bounty of creative expression we would have never even imagined.
Absolutely, absolutely.